The letter arrived on the very morning Faith Wilson had finally decided to end her life. April 1878 brought no consolation to her grief, only the cruel reminder that another spring had come without her holding a child of her own. Deadwood, Dakota Territory was not kind to a woman with empty arms, and even less forgiving to a widow whose womb remained barren during her brief 3 years of marriage. Faith stood on her porch, the morning sun casting long shadows across the dusty street, her trembling fingers clutching the letter that had traveled all the way from Boston. Her sister's elegant handwriting announced the arrival of yet another niece, her fourth. Everyone around her seemed blessed with the gift of motherhood, while Faith's arms remained empty, her heart hollow. Another blessing from God, Mrs. Abernathy had declared yesterday at the general store, her voice deliberately loud enough for Faith to hear as she examined a bolt of calico. Some women are simply meant to be mothers, while others. The older woman had let her voice trail off, eyes sliding toward Faith with barely disguised contempt. It wasn't the first slight, nor would it be the last, but something in Faith had finally broken. At 26, she had buried her husband, endured pitying glances from those more fortunate, and suffered the whispers about her condition. What remained for her here? A lifetime of other women's children to teach at the schoolhouse while her own arms remained empty. Faith folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Today, she would finish her affairs, leave a note for Pastor Simmons, and walk to the creek where the currents ran swift enough this time of year. It seemed a fitting end to a life half-lived. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her dark thoughts. A lone rider was making his way down the main street, his form tall and straight in the saddle. Something about his confidence made Faith pause, watching as he dismounted in front of Henderson's hotel across the street. He was a stranger unusual for Deadwood, where most faces were familiar, if not always friendly. The man removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat touched by sun. He dusted off his travel-worn clothes, spoke briefly to the stable boy who came for his horse, then turned and his eyes met Faith's across the distance. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Faith felt herself caught in the gaze of a stranger whose eyes seemed to recognize something in her that she herself had forgotten. Then he nodded politely and disappeared into the hotel, leaving Faith oddly unsettled. She shook her head, dismissing the encounter. It mattered little who came or went from Deadwood today. She had decisions to make and a final letter to write. But as Faith turned to enter her small house, Mrs. Jennings from next door called out, waving eagerly. "Faith, dear, have you heard? The new schoolmaster has arrived." Faith froze. "Schoolmaster? But I haven't resigned yet." Mrs. Jennings approached, her round face flushed with excitement. "The town council decided weeks ago. They felt the children needed a man's discipline. I thought you knew." Her expression shifted to feigned sympathy. "Oh dear, I suppose they haven't told you yet. Well, I'm sure they'll find something else for you to do. Though what, I cannot imagine. Not much use for a woman without." She stopped herself, but the words hung in the air between them. Without children, without purpose, without value. Faith somehow managed a smile. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Jennings." Now even her position at the schoolhouse was to be taken from her. Faith felt her resolve harden. The creek would be waiting for her after she visited the school board to understand why she had been replaced without so much as a word. As she gathered her shawl, a commotion erupted from down the street. A wagon had overturned, and a child's cry pierced the morning air. Without thinking, Faith lifted her skirts and ran toward the sound. The wagon lay on its side, a wheel still spinning lazily. A woman was frantically calling for her son as townspeople gathered. Faith pushed through the crowd to find a boy of about 6 pinned beneath a crate, his face white with fear. Jimmy. The mother was hysterical, being held back by 2 men. "Someone help him." Faith dropped to her knees beside the boy. "Lie still, Jimmy, we'll get you out." "The crate's too heavy," someone muttered behind her. "Then find more hands." Faith snapped, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Stand back, madam." The voice was deep, authoritative. Faith looked up to see the stranger from the hotel, his coat discarded and sleeves rolled up. Their eyes met again, and this time she noticed they were the color of the summer sky. "I can lift it if you can pull him free," he said. Faith nodded, positioning herself to grab the boy. The stranger braced himself, muscles tensing as he gripped the heavy crate. With a grunt, he lifted, and Faith quickly pulled Jimmy clear, cradling him against her chest as she examined him for injuries. "My leg hurts," Jimmy whimpered. "Let me see." The stranger knelt beside them, his hands gentle as he examined the boy's leg. "No break, I think, just badly bruised." Jimmy's mother broke free and rushed to them, gathering her son into her arms with sobs of relief. Faith found herself suddenly bereft at the loss of the child's weight against her. "Thank you," the woman gasped, looking between Faith and the stranger. "God bless you both." The stranger stood, offering his hand to help Faith to her feet. "That was quick thinking, madam." "Faith Wilson," she said, accepting his hand and feeling strangely self-conscious about her dirt-smudged skirts and wind-blown hair. "I'm the schoolteacher here, or was, apparently. Grant Johnson." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. "And as it happens, I've just arrived to take a teaching position myself." So this was her replacement. Faith withdrew her hand, disappointment washing through her. Of course he would be handsome and capable, all the more reason for the town council to prefer him. "Then I suppose I should congratulate you, Mr. Johnson." Her voice sounded brittle to her own ears. "If you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Wilson, wait. I don't believe I'm replacing anyone. The council hired me to assist with the older boys, something about them needing a firmer hand while you continue with the younger children." Faith paused. "That's not what I was told." Grant frowned. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I'd be grateful if you might show me to the schoolhouse later. We could clarify matters with the council together." There was something earnest in his expression that made Faith hesitate. If what he said was true, she still had her position, the one thing keeping her tethered to this world. "Very well, Mr. Johnson. Meet me here at 2 o'clock. As Faith walked away, she felt his eyes following her. For the first time in months, her feet carried her home instead of toward the creek. She had promised to meet him, after all, and Faith Wilson had never broken a promise in her life. She would at least see what this Grant Johnson had to say before making any final decisions. Grant watched the schoolteacher walk away, struck by the quiet dignity in her posture, despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. There was something about Mrs. Wilson that had caught his attention even before the wagon accident, a profound sadness in her eyes that seemed at odds with her youth and beauty. He collected his coat and made his way back to the hotel, pondering the strange reception he'd received. The town council had written that the current teacher was eager for assistance with the more unruly boys. Yet Mrs. Wilson seemed entirely surprised by his arrival. After securing his room and washing the dust of travel from his face, Grant headed toward the school board chairman's house, as directed in his correspondence. Mr. Harold Peterson was a stout man with a perpetual frown who seemed displeased to be disturbed, despite their prearranged meeting. "Ah, Johnson, you've arrived." Peterson ushered him into a well-appointed sitting room. "Journey satisfactory?" "It was, thank you." Grant took the offered seat. "I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Wilson this morning. There seems to be some confusion about my role." Peterson's mouth tightened. No confusion, you'll be taking over the school entirely. The woman's unfit. Grant blinked in surprise. That wasn't our arrangement, sir. Your letter specified assistant teacher for the older boys only. Circumstances change. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. Faith Wilson has been unstable since her husband's passing. Too emotional for proper education. We need someone reliable. She seemed perfectly capable to me, Grant countered. Quick thinking during an emergency, in fact. You've known her for all of 5 minutes, Peterson scoffed. The woman can't even fulfill her natural purpose. As a woman, how can she properly shape our children's minds? Grant stiffened at the crude implication. I fail to see what Mrs. Wilson's personal circumstances have to do with her teaching abilities. Peterson leaned forward. Listen, Johnson. You come highly recommended from that fancy Philadelphia school. We're offering you a position many would covet. Don't concern yourself with Faith Wilson. She'll find another way to occupy herself. Grant stood, unable to hide his distaste. Mr. Peterson, I accepted this position with the understanding that I would be working alongside the existing teacher. If that arrangement has changed, perhaps you should have informed me and Mrs. Wilson before my arrival. You're refusing the position. Peterson's face reddened. I'm declining to participate in the dismissal of a teacher without cause, Grant clarified. I'll meet with Mrs. Wilson as planned to see the schoolhouse. If she wishes to continue teaching alongside me as originally agreed, I'll stay. Otherwise, I'll be on the next stage out of Deadwood. Peterson stood as well, his expression thunderous. You'll regret taking her side, Johnson. That woman is nothing but a burden on this community. Grant placed his hat back on his head. I've made no decisions about sides, Mr. Peterson. I simply believe in honesty and fair treatment. Good day to you, sir. As Grant walked back toward the town center, he pondered what had prompted his defense of a woman he barely knew. Perhaps it was the deep sadness he'd glimpsed in her eyes, or perhaps it was simply his innate sense of justice rebelling against Peterson's obvious prejudice. Whatever the reason, Grant found himself looking forward to their meeting at 2 o'clock more than he cared to admit. Faith spent the hours before her appointment with Mr. Johnson in a strange state of uncertainty. The letter to her sister remained half-written on her small desk, her final words now unfinished as she contemplated this unexpected development. If she still had her position at the school, even partially, did she have reason enough to stay? The cruelty of the townspeople wouldn't stop. The empty ache in her arms wouldn't fill. But teaching the children had been her one solace these past years, her purpose when all else seemed meaningless. At 1:30, Faith changed into her best navy blue dress, pinned her dark blonde hair more carefully, and scrutinized her reflection. Her hazel eyes, once bright with hope, now looked too large in her thin face. 3 years of grief had etched subtle lines around her mouth that hadn't been there when Thomas was alive. This is purely professional, she told her reflection firmly, ignoring the strange flutter in her stomach when she recalled Grant Johnson's steady blue gaze. Faith arrived at their meeting place precisely at 2, unsurprised to find Mr. Johnson already waiting. Punctuality was the mark of a good teacher, Mrs. Wilson. He tipped his hat politely. Thank you for coming. The schoolhouse is this way, she said, gesturing down the side street. As they walked, Grant cleared his throat. I spoke with Mr. Peterson earlier. Faith tensed. And what did our esteemed board chairman have to say? He seems to be under the impression that I'm to replace you entirely. Grant's voice was carefully neutral. That wasn't my understanding when I accepted the position. Faith stopped walking. And now that you know his intentions. Grant met her eyes directly. I told him I came to assist you, not replace you, and if that arrangement is no longer available, I would decline the position. Faith stared at him, caught completely off guard. "You would refuse the job. But why?" "Because it's not the job I agreed to take," he said simply. "And because removing a teacher without cause or notice seems unjust." Something warm flickered in Faith's chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Someone was standing up for her. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know enough." His gaze was steady. "I saw how you responded when that child was in danger. That tells me more about your character than any gossip Mr. Peterson might share." They resumed walking, Faith's mind racing. When they reached the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, she unlocked the door with the key she kept on a chain around her neck. "It's not much," she said, gesturing to the simple room with its rows of benches and desks, the blackboard at the front and the small stove in the corner. "But we manage." Grant walked slowly through the space, examining the children's work posted on the walls, the carefully labeled maps, the row of books on the single shelf. "How many students?" he asked. 28 when everyone attends. Ages 6 to 16. Faith watched him, trying to gauge his reaction. "The older boys can be challenging, especially Roger Peterson and his friends." Grant raised an eyebrow. "The chairman's son, I presume," Faith nodded. "He believes rules don't apply to him. His father agrees." "I see." Grant ran a hand along one of the desks. "Mrs. Wilson, may I speak frankly?" "Please do." "I came to Deadwood because I wanted to teach somewhere my methods would make a difference." He turned to face her. "I don't care for politics or small-town prejudices. I care about education. If you're willing to continue teaching alongside me as originally planned, I'd be honored to work with you." Faith studied him, searching for signs of insincerity but finding none. "And if the board insists otherwise, then they can find another teacher." His jaw set with determination. "But I suggest we present a united front. They'll find it harder to dismiss both of us." Faith felt a smile tug at her lips, the first genuine one in longer than she could remember. "Mr. Johnson, I believe we may work well together after all." They spent the next hour discussing teaching methods and the curriculum, Faith showing him the textbooks and sharing insights about individual students. Grant proved knowledgeable and thoughtful, offering suggestions without dismissing her experience. When they finally locked the schoolhouse and stepped back into the late afternoon sunlight, Faith realized her earlier dark thoughts had receded entirely. For the first time in months, she had something to look forward to, even if it was just the challenge of facing down the school board with an unexpected ally at her side. "We should meet with the board tomorrow," Grant suggested as they walked back toward town. "Present our plan for sharing the teaching duties." "They won't like it," Faith warned. "Perhaps not, but children's education should come before personal preferences." He hesitated, then added, "Would you join me for dinner at the hotel? We could finalize our approach." Faith faltered. Dining alone with a man would certainly set tongues wagging exactly what she didn't need. Yet the thought of returning to her empty house with its half-written farewell letter held no appeal. "Just a professional dinner," Grant added, sensing her hesitation. "To discuss our strategy." Faith nodded. "Very well. A professional dinner." They parted ways to allow Faith time to freshen up, agreeing to meet at the hotel restaurant at 6. As Faith walked home, she realized the letter to her sister still sat unfinished on her desk. She folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. There would be time to write a proper response later, one that didn't carry the weight of a final goodbye. For now, Faith Wilson had a dinner to prepare for and a battle to plan. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Deadwood, which wasn't saying much compared to the dining rooms Grant had frequented in Philadelphia. Still, the tables were clean, the lighting adequate, and the smell of roasting beef promised a decent meal. Grant had arrived early, securing a table near the window where they could speak without being overheard. He watched Faith enter, noting how several diners turned to stare as she made her way toward him. Her chin was high, her posture perfect, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremble in her hands as she placed her reticule on the table. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, standing to help with her chair. "Thank you for joining me, Mr. Johnson." She sat gracefully, her eyes darting around the room. "I should warn you that dining with me may affect how the town receives you." Grant resumed his seat. "Are you so unpopular?" Faith's smile was sad. "A barren widow has little value in a place like Deadwood." A widow who teaches other people's children while unable to have her own is considered by some to be an affront to natural order. The bluntness of her statement took Grant aback. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Thomas died 3 years ago. Minor's consumption." Faith's voice was matter-of-fact, though her fingers twisted her napkin. "We were married for 3 years before that. No children came." Grant considered his response carefully. "And this is why the town treats you poorly." Faith met his eyes directly. "A woman's worth is measured by her ability to bear children, Mr. Johnson, at least in places like this. When I failed at that, people began to wonder what purpose I served." "That's absurd," Grant said, unable to hide his indignation. "Your value as a teacher, as a person, has nothing to do with childbearing." A genuine smile touched Faith's lips briefly. "You're not from a small town, are you?" "Philadelphia," he confirmed. "Though I grew up in rural Connecticut." "And what brings a Philadelphia educator to Deadwood?" "Surely there were more appealing positions available to you." Grant paused as the waiter arrived to take their order. Once they were alone again, he answered, "I wanted something different, something challenging." Faith raised an eyebrow. "Be careful what you wish for, Mr. Johnson." "Grant," he corrected, "if we're to be colleagues." "Faith," she offered in return. Their dinner arrived and conversation shifted to their strategy for the school board meeting. Grant found himself impressed by Faith's insights and thoughtfulness. She knew each board member's weaknesses and strengths, had anticipated their arguments and prepared reasonable counters. "You've given this considerable thought," he commented as they finished their meal. Faith shrugged slightly. "I've had cause to defend my position before." Though never with an ally. The word hung between them, ally. Grant found himself wanting to be more than that, which surprised him. He had come to Deadwood to escape entanglements, not create new ones. "We should be prepared for them to reject our proposal entirely," Faith added. "What will you do then?" Grant met her gaze. "What I said before, I'll decline the position." "Why?" The question seemed to burst from her. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Then, with a half-smile, "And perhaps because I'm stubborn enough to dislike being misled about a position I traveled 1,500 miles to take." Faith studied him as if trying to solve a complex equation. "You're an unusual man, Grant Johnson. I'll take that as a compliment." He signaled for the bill. "May I walk you home?" The evening air had cooled, and Faith drew her shawl tighter as they walked the short distance to her small house near the edge of town. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, both contemplating the confrontation that awaited them the following day. At her gate, Faith turned to him. "Thank you for dinner, and for your support." "We're colleagues now," Grant reminded her. "Supporting each other is part of the arrangement." Faith nodded, her expression softening in the lamplight spilling from her porch. "Good night, then." "Good night, Faith." Grant waited until she was safely inside before turning back toward the hotel. Troubled by the injustice of her situation but increasingly certain, he had made the right decision in standing with her. There was something about Faith Wilson that called to him a quiet strength beneath her sadness that he admired. Whatever happened with the school board tomorrow, Grant was no longer sorry he had come to Deadwood. The meeting with the school board the next morning went exactly as Faith had predicted. The 5 men, all prominent businessmen in town, were stunned by their united front, then dismissive, and finally angry when neither Faith nor Grant would budge from their position. "This is preposterous," Harold Peterson sputtered, his face mottled with rage. "Johnson, you're new here. You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," Grant replied calmly. "Mrs. Wilson is an experienced teacher with the respect of her students. I was hired to assist with the older boys, not replace her entirely." "The arrangement is no longer suitable," Peterson insisted. "Faith's personal situation has become a distraction to the children." Faith, who had remained composed throughout, finally spoke. "My personal situation, Mr. Peterson. Would you care to elaborate on that for Mr. Johnson?" The room fell uncomfortably silent. None of the board members would meet her eyes. "Perhaps you're referring to the incident last week," Faith continued, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "When your son Roger told the younger children that I was cursed by God because I couldn't have babies." Grant glanced at her, surprised by both the revelation and her forthrightness in addressing it. "Children say foolish things," Peterson muttered. "They repeat what they hear at home." "Precisely," Faith agreed. "And what they hear at home affects their behavior in school." Mr. Donovan, the bank manager and a more reasonable member of the board, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, we don't question your teaching abilities, but the community has concerns." "The community," Faith echoed, "or just certain influential members of it." "This isn't getting us anywhere," Peterson snapped. "The decision is made. Johnson teaches or we find someone else." Grant stood, towering over the seated board members. "Gentlemen, let me be clear. I will not accept this position if it means displacing Mrs. Wilson. My contract specifically states I am to assist with the older boys, sharing teaching duties. Either honor that agreement, or I'll be on the next stage out of Deadwood." The board members exchanged glances. Losing a male teacher with Grant's credentials would be embarrassing, especially after they'd boasted to neighboring communities about their new hire. "What do you propose?" Donovan finally asked. "Exactly what was agreed upon in my contract," Grant said. "Mrs. Wilson continues with the younger children while I take the older boys. We share the classroom but divide the teaching responsibilities." "And if we refuse?" Peterson challenged. "Then you lose both of us," Faith said quietly, rising to stand beside Grant. "And explain to parents why their children have no teacher at all while you search for replacements." After nearly an hour of additional debate, the board reluctantly agreed to their proposal with the stipulation that it would be reviewed at the end of the term. It was a temporary victory at best, but Faith left the meeting feeling more hopeful than she had in months. "That went better than expected," Grant commented as they walked toward the schoolhouse to prepare for classes the following day. Faith laughed softly. "Is that what success looks like in Philadelphia? I'd hate to see failure." "We achieved our goal," he reminded her, even if Peterson looked like he was swallowing nails the entire time. "He'll make trouble," Faith warned, "especially through his son." "Let him try," Grant said with quiet confidence. "I've handled troublesome boys before." At the schoolhouse, they spent the day rearranging the room to accommodate their shared teaching. The larger boys would sit on one side with Grant, the younger children with Faith on the other, but they would coordinate lessons and share resources. As they worked, Faith found herself watching Grant, the careful way he handled the books, his methodical approach to organizing the space, the respect with which he treated her ideas. He was unlike any man she had met in Deadwood, perhaps unlike any man she had ever known. "You're staring," Grant said without looking up from the papers he was sorting. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm trying to figure you out," she admitted. "Most men would have taken the easier path." Grant finally looked up, his blue eyes serious. "My father taught me that the easy path and the right path rarely run parallel. I've found that to be true in most situations." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Grant's expression softened with memory. "A country doctor who never turned away a patient who needed help, regardless of their ability to pay. He died doing what he believed in treating patients during a typhoid outbreak." "I'm sorry," Faith said, understanding the loss reflected in his eyes. Grant nodded his acknowledgement, then changed the subject. "Will you tell me about the students I'll be teaching? Especially Roger Peterson." They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the children, Faith sharing insights about each student's strengths and weaknesses. When they finally finished their preparations, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the schoolroom floor. "We make a good team," Grant observed as they locked up the building. "We'll see if you still think so after meeting the children," Faith replied, though she couldn't keep the smile from her voice. As they walked back toward town, Grant suddenly asked, "Why do you stay here, Faith? Where the people treat you unkindly?" Faith considered the question. "Where would I go? I have no family nearby, limited funds, and this is the only home I've known since marrying Thomas." She paused. "And despite everything, I love teaching these children. Even Roger Peterson on his better days." Grant nodded, seeming to understand. "Well, I'm glad you stayed. The children need you." After a moment, he added softly, "And I would have missed knowing you." The simple statement touched something in Faith that had been dormant for too long. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Jennings hurrying toward them, her expression alight with curiosity. "Faith, dear, and Mr. Johnson, I heard about the board meeting." She looked between them with barely concealed excitement. "Such a modern arrangement, both of you teaching together." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jennings," Faith said politely. "Yes, we're looking forward to the new term." "I'm sure you are." Mrs. Jennings's gaze lingered on Grant appreciatively. "Mr. Johnson, you must join us for dinner sometime. My daughter Violet plays the piano beautifully. I'm sure you'd enjoy her company." Grant smiled politely. "Thank you for the invitation, madam. Perhaps once the school term is underway and we're more settled." Mrs. Jennings beamed. "Of course. Well, I must be going. So much to prepare for Sunday services." She hurried off, no doubt to spread word of their joint appearance. Faith sighed. "And so it begins." "What's that?" Grant asked. "The matchmaking," Faith explained. "Every unmarried man who arrives in Deadwood is immediately assessed as husband material for some daughter or niece. Violet Jennings is considered quite a catch." "Is she?" Grant seemed amused rather than interested. "She's 20, plays piano adequately, and her father owns the lumber mill," Faith said dryly. "That makes her practically royalty here." Grant chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind, though I didn't come to Deadwood looking for a wife." "What did you come looking for?" Faith asked, genuinely curious. Grant was quiet for a moment. "Purpose, I suppose. A place where teaching makes a real difference." They had reached the point where their paths diverged. Faith toward her small house, Grant back to the hotel. They stood awkwardly for a moment. "Until tomorrow, then," Faith finally said. 8 o'clock sharp," Grant nodded. "I'll be there. Sleep well, Faith." As she watched him walk away, Faith realized the letter to her sister still sat unfinished in her drawer. Tonight, she would write a different letter entirely, one that spoke of new beginnings rather than final endings. For the first time in years, Faith Wilson had something to look forward to when she woke in the morning. The first day of the new school term dawned bright and clear. with a hint of autumn crispness in the air despite it being only late April. Faith arrived at the schoolhouse early, lighting the stove to ward off the morning chill and arranging her books for the day's lessons. Grant arrived shortly after, carrying a large leather satchel. "Good morning," he greeted her cheerfully. "Ready for battle?" Faith smiled despite her nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." The children began arriving soon after, filling the schoolhouse with chatter and energy. Most of the younger ones ran to Faith with hugs and stories of their holiday adventures. The older boys hung back, eyeing Grant with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. At precisely 8 o'clock, Faith rang the bell to begin the day. The children found their seats according to the new arrangement, while Grant stood tall beside Faith at the front of the room. "Good morning, children," Faith began. "As you can see, we have some changes this term. This is Mr. Johnson, who will be teaching the older students while I continue with the younger ones." Grant stepped forward. "Good morning. I'm looking forward to working with each of you." A hand shot up from the back row where the oldest boys sat. Faith recognized Roger Peterson's smirk immediately. "Yes, Roger," she acknowledged, bracing herself. "Pa says Mr. Johnson is only here because Mrs. Wilson can't handle real teaching," the 14-year-old said loudly. "On account of her being cursed and all." A shocked silence fell over the room. The younger children looked confused while some of the older ones snickered. Before Faith could respond, Grant's voice cut through the tension. "Stand up, young man." Roger blinked, surprised, but slowly got to his feet. "Your name?" Grant asked, though they both knew perfectly well who the boy was. "Roger Peterson," he answered, a hint of defiance in his tone. "Mr. Peterson, in my classroom there are 3 rules," Grant said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "First, respect everyone, teachers and fellow students alike. Second, work to the best of your ability. Third, take responsibility for your actions." He paused. "You've already broken the first rule. Would you care to guess the consequence?" Roger shifted uncomfortably. "No, sir." "The consequence is that you will stay after school today and write an essay on the importance of respect," Grant said calmly. "You will also apologize to Mrs. Wilson, not because I demand it, but because it's the right thing to do." Roger's face reddened. Your father isn't here," Grant interrupted. "In this classroom you answer to Mrs. Wilson and myself. Now do you have something to say to your teacher?" The boy looked mutinous for a moment, then muttered, "Sorry, Mrs. Wilson." "Thank you, Roger. You may sit down." Grant turned to address the entire class. "Let me be clear to all of you. Mrs. Wilson is one of the finest teachers I've ever met. We are fortunate to have her, and I won't tolerate disrespect toward her or anyone else in this room. Is that understood?" A chorus of yes. Mr. Johnson filled the room. Faith felt a warmth spread through her chest at Grant's defense. No one had stood up for her like that since Thomas died. Certainly, no one had challenged the Peterson family's influence so directly. The rest of the morning proceeded without incident. Faith was impressed by Grant's teaching style, firm but engaging, challenging the older boys while encouraging their participation. She caught herself watching him more often than she should, admiring his patience and the natural authority he commanded without resorting to the harsh discipline some male teachers favored. At midday, the children went outside to eat their packed lunches, leaving Faith and Grant alone in the schoolhouse. "That was quite a beginning," Faith commented, unwrapping her own simple lunch. Grant smiled ruefully. "I may have made an enemy of Harold Peterson already." "You definitely have," Faith confirmed, "but you've probably gained the respect of every other parent whose children have suffered under Roger's bullying." "Does he target the younger children often?" Faith nodded. "Especially those from less prosperous families." The Peterson lumber mill employs many of their fathers, which gives Roger an additional sense of power. Grant frowned. That explains much about his attitude. He took a bite of his sandwich, then asked, "What did he mean about you being cursed?" Faith's appetite vanished. She set down her food, unable to meet Grant's eyes. "It's what some in town say about my inability to bear children, that God is punishing me for some sin." She forced herself to look up. "I told you a woman's worth is measured by her ability to bear children here." Grant's expression darkened. "That's not just cruel, it's ignorant, and to teach a child to repeat such things." "Roger only says what he hears at home," Faith said quietly. "That doesn't excuse it." Grant's voice was gentle but firm. "Faith, you know those beliefs are wrong, don't you?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, she had lived with the whispers, the pitying glances, the not-so-subtle suggestions that her barrenness was somehow her fault. Part of her had begun to believe it. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she admitted. "Except that teaching is the one thing I know I can do well." Grant reached across the desk, briefly touching her hand. "You are more than your ability to bear children, Faith. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." The afternoon lessons passed quickly, and soon the children were gathering their things to leave, all except Roger Peterson, who remained sullenly in his seat as promised. "I'll stay with Roger while he completes his essay," Grant told Faith. "No need for both of us to remain." Faith hesitated. "Are you certain? His father may come looking for him." "All the better," Grant said with a determined smile. "Mr. Peterson and I should get better acquainted." Faith gathered her things, strangely reluctant to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow morning then." As she walked home, Faith reflected on the day. Grant's defense of her had been unexpected and deeply touching. For years, she had weathered the town's judgment alone, growing accustomed to the isolation. Having someone stand beside her, stand up for her, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Faith wasn't naive. She knew that Grant Johnson was just passing through her life. Once his contract ended, he would likely move on to better opportunities, leaving her alone again. Allowing herself to depend on his support, or worse, to develop feelings for him, would only lead to more heartache. Yet as Faith prepared her solitary dinner that evening, she couldn't help wondering what was happening at the schoolhouse, and whether Grant Johnson was as adept at handling Harold Peterson as he had been with Roger. She would have been surprised to know that no confrontation occurred at all. Harold Peterson never came for his son, sending a stable boy instead to inform Roger that he was expected at the mill, once his punishment was complete. Grant watched the boy struggle through his essay, offering guidance when needed, but insisting he complete the full 2 pages on the importance of respect. "My pa says women are too emotional to be good teachers," Roger said at one point, breaking the silence. "That's why they hired you." Grant set down the papers he was grading. "Your father is entitled to his opinion, but in my experience, the best teachers are those who care deeply about their students regardless of whether they are men or women." Roger frowned, considering this. "Mrs. Wilson cries sometimes." "When she thinks no one's looking." The simple observation caught Grant by surprise. "Everyone feels sad sometimes, Roger. Pa says it's because she can't have babies, that normal women are supposed to have babies." Roger looked genuinely confused. "Is that true, Mr. Johnson?" Grant chose his words carefully. "Some women have children, some don't. Some men have children, some don't. That doesn't make anyone more or less normal. It's just how life works sometimes." "Then why do people talk about her like she's broken?" The boy's bluntness was startling. Grant sighed, setting aside the teacher's role to speak man to man with the confused boy. "Because people fear what they don't understand, and they can be unkind about things that make them uncomfortable." Grant leaned forward. "Roger, Mrs. Wilson is a fine teacher who cares about every student in this school, including you, despite how you've treated her. That's what matters, not whether she has children of her own." Roger seemed to absorb this, then bent back over his essay. When he finally finished, he handed the papers to Grant without meeting his eyes. "May I go now, sir?" Grant read through the essay quickly. It was rudimentary but showed genuine thought about why respect mattered. "Yes, you may go. I'll see you tomorrow, Roger." The boy gathered his things, then paused at the door. "Mr. Johnson, is Mrs. Wilson really cursed?" "No, Roger," Grant said firmly. "She's just a person who has experienced loss like many others. Remember that the next time you're tempted to repeat unkind things about her." After Roger left, Grant sat alone in the schoolhouse for a long time, thinking about Faith Wilson and the quiet dignity with which she bore her grief and the town's judgment. There was a strength in her that called to something in him, something he had thought lost when he left Philadelphia. Grant had come to Deadwood seeking purpose. He was beginning to wonder if he might find much more. The weeks passed in a rhythm of school days, each one easier than the last as the children adjusted to the new arrangement. Grant and Faith developed a comfortable teaching partnership, their different styles complementing each other, while they maintained consistent expectations for behavior and academic progress. Even Roger Peterson's attitude improved, though whether from Grant's influence or simply the novelty of having a male teacher remained to be seen. Faith found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't for years. The small moments of shared glances across the classroom, working side by side planning lessons, and conversations during lunch became highlights she treasured. Grant brought a warmth and purpose back into her life that she had thought forever lost, yet she guarded her heart carefully. Grant was unfailingly kind and supportive, but he had given no indication that his feelings extended beyond professional friendship. Faith reminded herself daily that attachment would only lead to pain when he eventually left Deadwood. Spring was giving way to early summer when the incident occurred that would change everything between them. It began innocuously enough, with a note delivered to the schoolhouse during afternoon lessons. Faith was working with the younger children on their reading when a boy from town brought the message. "For you, Mrs. Wilson," the child said, handing her the folded paper. "Ma says it's urgent." Faith opened the note, her expression growing concerned as she read. "Mr. Johnson," she called across the room. "Could you come here a moment?" Grant excused himself from the geometry lesson he was conducting and joined her. "Is everything all right?" "Mrs. Thornton has gone into labor," Faith explained quietly. "Her husband is away on a cattle drive and she's asking for my help until the doctor can arrive." Grant nodded. "Of course, I can manage both groups for the remainder of the day. Are you certain? There's still 2 hours before dismissal." "Go," Grant assured her. "Mrs. Thornton needs you more than we do right now." Faith gathered her shawl. "Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." What neither of them could know was that Dr. Miller was attending a difficult birth at a distant ranch and wouldn't return until late evening. By the time Faith realized this, Mrs. Thornton's labor was progressing rapidly, with complications that were beyond Faith's limited experience. "The baby's not turned right," Mrs. Thornton's sister explained frantically. "And there's no one else in town who knows what to do." Faith sent for help, but the message came back that the midwife was too ill to come. With no other options, Faith stayed, doing her best to comfort Mrs. Thornton and follow the instructions the sister had received from the doctor for such emergencies. Hours passed in a blur of fear and determination. Faith had assisted at births before but never taken charge. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny, blue-tinged girl who didn't immediately cry, Faith's hands trembled as she cleared the infant's mouth and gently rubbed her back. "Please, Mrs. Thornton whispered, exhausted and frightened. "Please let her live." The moment the baby finally gasped and let out a thin wail was the most profound relief Faith had ever experienced. Tears streamed down her face as she wrapped the newborn and placed her in her mother's arms. "She's beautiful," Faith said, her voice breaking. "Perfect." "Thank God," Mrs. Thornton breathed. "And thank you, Faith. I don't know what we would have done without you." The next hours were spent ensuring both mother and baby were stable and comfortable. By the time Dr. Miller finally arrived, checked his patients and pronounced them both doing well considering the circumstances, it was well past midnight. "You did good work here, Mrs. Wilson," the doctor told her gruffly. "Quick thinking saved them both." Faith nodded, too exhausted for words. Her dress was stained with blood, her hair had fallen from its pins, and her arms ached from the hours of supporting Mrs. Thornton through her labor. "I'll see you home," Dr. Miller offered. "It's too late for a woman to be walking alone." The night air was cool against Faith's flushed skin as they walked the quiet streets of Deadwood. Every muscle in her body protested, yet she felt a curious lightness of spirit. She had helped bring a new life into the world, something she would never experience herself. "You have a gift for this," Dr. Miller commented as they approached her house. "Ever consider training as a midwife?" Faith shook her head. "Teaching is my calling. Pity. We could use someone with your steadiness in a crisis." The doctor tipped his hat as they reached her gate. "Get some rest, Mrs. Wilson. You've earned it." Faith was too tired to light more than a single lamp. She washed quickly, changed into her nightgown, and fell into bed, expecting to drift immediately to sleep. Instead, she found herself wide awake, her mind replaying the moment when the newborn had been placed in her arms, so tiny, so perfect, so complete in her helplessness. Faith had felt the familiar ache, the emptiness that never truly left her, but also something else. A profound gratitude for being part of that sacred moment. When sleep finally claimed her, Faith's dreams were filled with babies she would never hold and children who would never call her mother. The next morning, Faith awoke later than usual, the events of the previous night leaving her drained. She hurried through her preparations, knowing Grant would have to manage both groups of students until she arrived. When she reached the schoolhouse, she was surprised to find the children engaged in an orderly reading exercise, with Grant moving between the groups as if he had been teaching both levels for years. "Mrs. Wilson." Several of the younger children called out when they saw her, their faces lighting up. Grant looked up from helping a student, relief crossing his features. "Faith," he said, momentarily forgetting formality. "You're here." "I'm so sorry I'm late," Faith apologized, removing her bonnet. "Children, continue with your reading," Grant instructed before crossing to Faith. "Are you all right? We heard what happened with Mrs. Thornton." Faith blinked in surprise. "News travels fast." "Dr. Miller stopped by this morning to let me know you might not be able to teach today," Grant explained. "He said you were up all night helping deliver the Thornton baby." "I was," Faith confirmed, "but I'm perfectly capable of teaching." Grant studied her face. "You look exhausted." "Why don't you go home and rest? I can manage for one day." "I'm fine," Faith insisted, though her body betrayed her with a slight sway. Grant lowered his voice. "Faith, you're dead on your feet. Let me help you." The genuine concern in his eyes nearly undid her. After the emotional intensity of the birth, her defenses were lowered, her usual careful composure fragile. "Very well," she conceded. "Perhaps for today." "I'll walk you home after I dismiss the children for lunch," Grant offered, "to make sure you get there safely." Faith nodded, too tired to argue. She spent the morning observing Grant with the children, impressed by how easily he had adapted to teaching both groups. The younger children clearly adored him already, while the older ones showed him a respect they had never accorded her. At the midday break, Faith bid the children goodbye and allowed Grant to escort her home. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached her gate. "Thank you," Faith said, "for managing everything today." "It's what partners do," Grant replied simply. "Support each other when needed." Faith smiled at that. "I suppose it is." "Faith." Grant hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "What you did last night was remarkable." "Anyone would have helped," Faith demurred. "Perhaps, but not everyone could have saved both mother and child." Grant's eyes were warm with admiration. "Dr. Miller said you showed extraordinary courage and skill." Faith looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "It was difficult," she admitted. "Holding that baby knowing I'll never—" She stopped, horrified that she had revealed so much. "Never have one of your own," Grant finished gently. Faith nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in her throat. "May I ask?" Grant began, then paused. "Is it certain that you can't have children?" The question would have been unforgivably personal from anyone else, but from Grant, it felt like genuine concern rather than prying. 3 years of marriage with no conception," Faith said quietly. "And before Thomas died, the doctor in Cheyenne confirmed it." "Something wrong with my womb," he said. The memory still stung. "Thomas was disappointed, but he said it didn't matter, that we had each other." Grant was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he reached for her hand. "Thomas was right. Your worth isn't defined by your ability to bear children, Faith." The simple touch of his hand around hers broke something inside Faith, a dam of emotion she had held back for too long. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to withdraw her hand. "I don't apologize," Grant said, not releasing her. "You've been carrying this burden alone for too long." Faith looked up at him through her tears, seeing only compassion in his eyes. "It shouldn't matter so much. I have my students, my teaching, it's enough." "Is it?" Grant asked softly. The question hung between them, unanswerable. Faith withdrew her hand gently. "You should return to the school, the children will be waiting." Grant nodded, respecting her need for space. "Rest well, Faith. I'll see you tomorrow." As she watched him walk away, Faith wondered what had possessed her to reveal so much to him. Exhaustion had lowered her guard, certainly, but there was something about Grant Johnson that made her want to trust him with her deepest pain. It was a dangerous feeling, one that promised more heartache when he eventually left Deadwood behind. Yet, as Faith lay down to rest, she couldn't deny the comfort she had found in his words and the warmth of his hand around hers. For the first time in years, she had shared her burden with someone who didn't judge her for it. That night, Faith slept more peacefully than she had in a very long time. The following days brought a subtle shift in Faith and Grant's relationship. Nothing overt, they maintained their professional partnership at the schoolhouse, but there was a new understanding between them, a deeper connection that manifested in small ways. A lingering glance, a brief touch when passing materials, a shared smile at a student's clever response. Faith found herself looking for these moments, treasuring them even as she warned herself against reading too much into them. Grant was kind, that was all. His friendship was a gift she hadn't expected in Deadwood, but she mustn't mistake it for anything more. 2 weeks after the Thornton baby's birth, Faith received an invitation to visit mother and child. She went on Saturday afternoon, bringing a small hand-knitted blanket as a gift. Mrs. Thornton welcomed her warmly, proudly displaying her daughter named Faith in her honor. "Would you like to hold her?" the new mother offered. Faith hesitated only briefly before accepting the swaddled infant. The baby was heavier than she remembered, her face more defined now, her tiny hands grasping reflexively at Faith's finger when she offered it. She's perfect, Faith murmured, feeling the familiar ache in her heart but also a genuine joy for Mrs. Thornton. We wouldn't have her if not for you, Mrs. Thornton said seriously. Dr. Miller told us both little Faith and I might have died without your help. Faith shook her head. I only did what anyone would have done. Not anyone could have stayed so calm, been so steady. Mrs. Thornton watched her hold the baby with a thoughtful expression. It's not fair, is it, that some of us are blessed with children while others who would make wonderful mothers go without? Faith looked up, startled by the frank acknowledgement of her situation. Life isn't always fair, she said softly, returning her gaze to the infant. But she's a blessing, and I'm grateful I could help bring her safely into the world. After an hour of visiting, Faith handed the baby back and prepared to leave. As Mrs. Thornton walked her to the door, she said unexpectedly, "That new teacher, Mr. Johnson. He came by yesterday to inquire after us." Faith blinked in surprise. "Did he?" Mrs. Thornton nodded. "He spoke very highly of you, said the town doesn't appreciate what a treasure they have in you." She smiled knowingly. "He's not spoken for, is he?" "Not that I'm aware of," Faith replied carefully, her pulse quickening despite herself. "Well, a man doesn't speak of a woman the way he spoke of you unless there's something there," Mrs. Thornton said with the confidence of a happily married woman. "Just an observation." Faith bid her goodbye, her thoughts in turmoil as she walked home. Grant had visited the Thorntons, had spoken well of her. It was kind of him, certainly, but Mrs. Thornton seemed to imply something more. She was so distracted that she nearly collided with someone on the street. "Mrs. Wilson, just who I was hoping to see." Faith looked up to find Violet Jennings smiling at her, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. The young woman was impeccably dressed as always, her blonde curls arranged fashionably beneath her hat. "Miss Jennings," Faith greeted her politely. "How are you today?" "Wonderful. Mother is hosting a dinner party tonight and Mr. Johnson has agreed to attend." Violet's smile turned slightly predatory. "He's such a fascinating man, don't you think? So educated and refined." Faith kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Johnson is an excellent teacher." "Oh, he's much more than that," Violet said with a meaningful glance. "Mother says he'll make someone a fine husband, once he's settled, of course." The implication was clear. Violet had set her sights on Grant, and with her family's social position and her own considerable charms, she was likely to succeed. "I'm sure Mr. Johnson will make his own decisions in that regard," Faith said evenly. Violet laughed lightly. "Of course he will. But a man appreciates guidance, don't you think? Especially one new to town." She adjusted her gloves. "Well, I must be going. So much to prepare for tonight." As Violet walked away, Faith felt a hollowness in her chest that she told herself was not jealousy. Of course, the town's eligible young women would pursue Grant. He was handsome, educated, and kind, everything a woman might want in a husband, and what business was it of hers? Grant was her colleague, perhaps her friend, but nothing more. He deserved a young wife who could give him children, a proper family. Someone like Violet Jennings, however calculating her interest might be. Faith continued home, telling herself the ache she felt was simply the remnant of her visit with baby Faith, not disappointment that Grant would be dining with the Jennings family tonight while she ate alone. It was nearly dusk when a knock at her door startled Faith from her reading. She opened it to find Grant standing on her porch, dressed in his best suit. "Grant," she said in surprise, "I thought you were dining with the Jennings family tonight." "I am," he confirmed, "but I wanted to speak with you first." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "May I come in for a moment?" Faith hesitated, aware of how it might look to have a single man in her home, but she stepped aside. "Briefly. You shouldn't keep the Jennings waiting." Grant entered, removing his hat. He stood awkwardly in her small sitting room, looking around at the modest but neat furnishings. I wanted to ask your opinion on something." "Oh." Faith remained standing, maintaining a proper distance between them. "The school board is meeting next week to review our teaching arrangement," Grant explained. "I thought we might discuss our approach beforehand." Faith frowned slightly. Was this really why he had come? "I suppose that's wise, though I assumed we would simply present the same arguments as before." "With one difference," Grant said. "We now have 6 weeks of successful teaching to demonstrate that the arrangement works." Faith nodded. "True. The children have progressed well under our shared instruction." "Exactly." Grant shifted his weight, still seeming ill at ease. "Faith, there's something else I wanted to ask you." Faith's heart quickened despite herself. "Yes." "Would you consider," Grant began, but was interrupted by another knock at the door. Faith excused herself to answer it, finding Violet Jennings on her porch, her expression darkening when she spotted Grant inside. "Mr. Johnson," Violet said, her voice brittle. "Mother sent me to escort you to our home. We were concerned when you were delayed." Grant looked genuinely surprised. "Miss Jennings, I apologize. I had intended to be prompt but needed to discuss a school matter with Mrs. Wilson first." Violet's gaze moved between them, suspicion evident in her eyes. "I see. Well, we shouldn't keep everyone waiting. Mother has prepared quite an elaborate meal." "Of course," Grant said. He turned to Faith. "Perhaps we can continue our discussion tomorrow after church." Faith nodded, acutely aware of Violet's watchful gaze. "That would be fine, Mr. Johnson." Grant replaced his hat. "Good evening, then, Mrs. Wilson. Thank you for your time." As Faith closed the door behind them, she caught Violet slipping her hand possessively through Grant's arm. The sight shouldn't have bothered her, yet Faith found herself unable to return to her book, her thoughts consumed with what Grant might have been about to ask before they were interrupted. The next morning at church, Faith was keenly aware of Grant sitting with the Jennings family, Violet positioned strategically at his side. Mrs. Jennings looked triumphant, while Mr. Jennings appeared to be already calculating the business advantages of having an educated son-in-law. Faith sat alone as usual, focusing on Reverend Simmons's sermon about Joseph and Mary's journey to Bethlehem. The irony of a sermon centered on an impending birth was not lost on her, but Faith had made her peace with the church's emphasis on family and fertility. Her faith remained important to her, even if it sometimes felt like salt in her wounds. After the service, Faith was gathering her things when Grant appeared at her side. "Good morning, Faith," he said quietly. "Might we speak now?" Before Faith could respond, Mrs. Jennings materialized beside them. "Mr. Johnson, you simply must join us for Sunday dinner. Violet has been looking forward to continuing your conversation from last night." Grant smiled politely but firmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Jennings, but I'm afraid I have a prior commitment with Mrs. Wilson to discuss school matters." Mrs. Jennings's smile faltered. "Surely that can wait. The Lord's Day should be for fellowship, not work." "I consider supporting education a form of fellowship," Grant replied smoothly. "Perhaps another time, Mrs. Jennings retreated, visibly displeased while Violet watched from a distance, her expression stormy. "You shouldn't have declined," Faith murmured as they walked out of the church. "They'll take offense." "I said what was true," Grant replied. "We do need to talk, and I did make a commitment to you first." They walked in silence toward Faith's house, the spring air warm and fragrant with blooming flowers. Several townspeople nodded greetings, some looking curious at seeing them together outside of school hours. At Faith's gate, Grant hesitated. "Would you prefer to talk here or perhaps take a walk? It's a beautiful day." Faith considered the propriety of either option. A walk would be more public but also more intimate in its way. Having Grant in her home again would certainly set tongues wagging. A walk would be nice, she decided. There's a pleasant path along the creek. They strolled in companionable silence for a while, Grant seemingly gathering his thoughts while Faith tried to ignore the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Finally, Grant spoke. "I enjoyed meeting baby Faith yesterday. Mrs. Thornton speaks very highly of you." "She's kind to have named her daughter after me," Faith replied, "though I did little more than what was necessary." "You saved 2 lives," Grant corrected gently. "That's far from little." Faith shrugged, uncomfortable with praise as always. "What did you wish to ask me yesterday before Miss Jennings arrived?" Grant stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was serious, his eyes searching hers. "Faith, I've been in Deadwood for nearly 2 months now. In that time, I've come to admire you greatly, your strength, your compassion, your dedication to the children." Faith's heart began to race. "Grant, please let me finish," he said softly. "I came to Deadwood looking for purpose, for a place where I could make a difference. What I found was so much more." He took a deep breath. "I found you." Faith stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Faith, more than as a colleague or friend." Grant's voice was steady, though a hint of vulnerability showed in his eyes. "I believe we could build something meaningful together if you're willing." Faith took a step back, her thoughts in chaos. "You can't mean that," she whispered. Grant frowned. "Why would you say that?" "Because you deserve someone whole," Faith said, the words torn from her heart. "Someone who can give you a family, children, someone like Violet Jennings." Understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. "Is that what you think? That I want Violet Jennings, don't you? She's young, beautiful, from a good family. She could give you children." "Faith," Grant said gently, moving closer. "I have no interest in Violet Jennings or any other woman in Deadwood. It's you I care for, you I've grown to love." The word hung between them, monumental in its simplicity. "Love." Faith repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes, love." Grant smiled, a tender expression that made Faith's heart constrict. "And as for children, if they come, they come. If not, there are other ways to build a family. The children at school have shown me that." Faith shook her head, overwhelmed. "You say that now, but someday you might regret." "I know my own mind, Faith," Grant interrupted firmly. "And my own heart. I'm not asking for an answer today. Just think about it. Consider what we might be together." A twig snapped nearby, and Faith glanced up to see Roger Peterson standing a few yards away, his expression indicating he had heard at least some of their conversation. "Roger," Grant acknowledged calmly. "Good morning." The boy looked between them, clearly processing what he had witnessed. "Morning, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Wilson." He hesitated, then blurted, "Pa says Mr. Johnson is only staying in Deadwood until he finds a proper wife, then he'll move on to a real city." Faith felt as if she'd been struck. She looked at Grant, who seemed equally taken aback by the boy's statement. "Your father seems unusually concerned with my personal affairs," Grant said evenly. Roger shifted uncomfortably. "He says men like you don't stay in places like Deadwood unless they're running from something or looking for something. And you don't seem like you're running." The boy's astuteness was surprising. Faith found herself holding her breath, waiting for Grant's response. "Your father is partially correct," Grant admitted. "I did come to Deadwood looking for something, but I've found it now." He glanced at Faith. "And I have no plans to leave." Roger seemed to consider this. "So you're staying, even after the school term ends?" "That's my intention," Grant confirmed, "though it depends on several factors." Roger nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. You're a better teacher than the last one." He looked at Faith. "No offense, Mrs. Wilson." "None taken," Faith said, finding a small smile despite her tumultuous emotions. "I should get home." Roger said, suddenly remembering his manners. "Ma will be wondering where I am. See you tomorrow at school." He hurried off, leaving Faith and Grant alone again. Faith turned to Grant, her guard back up. "Were you planning to tell me you might leave after the term?" "No, because it isn't true," Grant said firmly. "Faith, I came to Deadwood for a new start. I intend to stay as long as I'm needed here and as long as there's reason for me to stay." His gaze was meaningful. Faith looked away, unable to bear the hope she saw in his eyes. "We should head back," she said quietly. "People will talk." Grant sighed but didn't press. "As you wish." They walked back toward town in silence, the moment of openness between them replaced by Faith's careful distance. At her gate, Grant paused. "Think about what I said, Faith. That's all I ask." Faith nodded, not trusting her voice. As she watched him walk away, she felt torn between hope and fear, between the possibility of happiness and the certainty of eventual pain. But for the first time in years, Faith Wilson allowed herself to imagine a future different from the lonely existence she had resigned herself to, a future that included Grant Johnson and the love he offered so freely. The week that followed was among the most confusing of Faith's life. At school, she and Grant maintained their professional relationship, giving no indication to the students that anything had changed between them. Yet Faith was acutely aware of his presence, of the way his eyes sought hers across the classroom, of the warmth in his smile when their glances met. Grant had not pressed her for an answer to his declaration, giving her the space he had promised. But Faith's thoughts were in constant turmoil, vacillating between hope and fear, between allowing herself to believe in the possibility of happiness and protecting herself from inevitable disappointment. On Thursday, the school board meeting arrived. Faith and Grant presented their case together, demonstrating the progress their students had made under their joint teaching and emphasizing the benefits of their arrangement. Even Harold Peterson seemed impressed by the results, though he made it clear the arrangement would continue to be temporary until a more permanent solution could be found. "We are the permanent solution," Grant stated firmly, surprising the board with his directness. "Mrs. Wilson and I work well together. The children are thriving and the parents are satisfied. I see no reason to change what's working." The board had no immediate counter to this logic and reluctantly agreed to extend their arrangement through the fall term, which would begin after the summer break in September. As they left the meeting, Grant touched Faith's elbow lightly. "We make a good team," he said quietly. "We do," Faith agreed, allowing herself a small smile. "Faith," Grant began, his expression earnest, "have you thought about what I said? About us?" Before Faith could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Jennings and Violet approaching rapidly. "Mr. Johnson," Mrs. Jennings called. "We were hoping to catch you. Violet is having a small gathering at our home this Saturday evening, just a few friends for music and conversation. We would be honored if you would attend." Grant glanced at Faith before responding. "That's very kind, Mrs. Jennings, but I already have plans for Saturday evening." "Oh," Mrs. Jennings looked disappointed. "Perhaps you could join us after your other engagement." "I'm afraid not," Grant said politely but firmly. "My plans are for the entire evening." Violet's eyes narrowed slightly. "What plans could be so important in Deadwood on a Saturday night?" Grant smiled. "I've asked Mrs. Wilson to dine with me to celebrate our successful school board meeting." Faith stared at him in surprise. He had done no such thing. Mrs. Jennings looked between them, her expression calculating. "How professional of you both." "Yes, isn't it?" Grant replied pleasantly. "If you'll excuse us, we have school matters to discuss before tomorrow." As the Jennings women walked away, Faith turned to Grant. "You shouldn't have said that. I never agreed to dine with you." Would you prefer I attend Violet's gathering? Grant asked, a hint of amusement in his eyes. That's not the point, Faith said, exasperated. You're creating expectations that Faith, Grant interrupted gently. It's just dinner. To celebrate our victory with the school board as colleagues. He paused. Unless you'd prefer it to be more than that. Faith felt her cheeks warm. This isn't the place to discuss such things. Then say you'll have dinner with me Saturday and we can discuss it then, Grant suggested. The hotel restaurant is public enough to be proper but private enough for conversation. Faith hesitated, torn between caution and the increasing difficulty of denying her feelings for Grant. Very well, she finally agreed. Dinner on Saturday, as colleagues. Grant's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. As colleagues, for now. Saturday arrived with a clarity of purpose Faith hadn't expected. After days of internal debate, she had made her decision. She would tell Grant the truth that she cared for him deeply, perhaps even loved him, but that she couldn't accept a relationship built on what she saw as his sacrifice. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green that Thomas had always said brought out the flecks of green in her hazel eyes. Her hair she arranged simply but elegantly, secured with her mother's silver combs. As Faith studied her reflection, she wondered what Grant saw when he looked at her. Not the young, hopeful woman Thomas had married, certainly. The years of grief and loneliness had left their mark, in the slight sadness around her eyes, in the caution with which she approached the world. Yet Grant looked at her as if she were precious, as if she were whole and desirable just as she was. It was that look, more than anything, that had begun to heal something Faith had thought permanently broken within her. Grant was waiting at the hotel restaurant when Faith arrived, standing immediately when he saw her. His expression of admiration made Faith's heart flutter despite her resolve. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Faith replied, allowing him to help with her chair. The dinner began pleasantly enough, with conversation about school matters and the approaching end of the term. But as their meal progressed, a tension grew between them, the anticipation of the conversation they both knew was coming. Finally, as they finished their dessert, Grant set down his fork and met Faith's eyes directly. "You've been quiet tonight. Have you thought about what I said by the creek?" Faith took a deep breath. "I have, a great deal." "And," Grant prompted when she didn't continue. "Grant, I care for you," Faith began carefully. "More than I expected to care for anyone again after Thomas died, but I can't give you what you deserve in a wife." Grant's expression softened. "What I deserve is a woman I respect and admire, a woman whose strength and kindness inspire me daily. A woman I love. That woman is you, Faith." The simple declaration made Faith's carefully prepared speech falter. "You say that now, but someday you'll want children, a family." "I want a life partner," Grant corrected gently. "Children would be a blessing, but they're not a requirement for my happiness." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "And there are many ways to build a family, Faith. Adoption, for one." Faith stared at him, caught off guard by the suggestion. "Adoption," Grant nodded. "There are many children who need homes, who need love. We could provide that if you wished it." The idea had never occurred to Faith. In Deadwood, family meant blood ties, inheritance, lineage. The notion that she might mother a child not born of her body seemed so foreign, yet as Grant spoke, a tiny flame of hope ignited in her heart. "I've never considered it," she admitted. "Will you consider it now?" Grant asked. "Will you consider a future with me, however that future might look?" Faith looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and love. Slowly, she turned her hand to clasp his. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll consider it." Grant's smile was radiant. "That's all I ask for now." As they left the restaurant, Faith was acutely aware of the curious glances from other diners. By morning, the entire town would be buzzing with speculation about her dinner with the handsome teacher. For once, Faith found she didn't care what people might say. The warmth of Grant's hand at her elbow, the promise of his words, and the possibility of a future she had thought forever closed to her occupied her thoughts entirely. At her gate, Grant paused. "May I call on you properly tomorrow, after church?" Faith nodded. "I'd like that." In the soft evening light, with no one to observe them at the edge of town, Grant leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on Faith's cheek. "Good night, Faith Wilson," he murmured. "Dream of possibilities." That night, for the first time in years, Faith did exactly that. The final weeks of the school term passed in a blur of activity. Between preparing end-of-year assessments for the students, organizing the school exhibition for parents, and navigating her evolving relationship with Grant, Faith barely had time to notice the whispers and curious glances that followed her through town. Grant called on her every Sunday after church, sometimes bringing books to discuss, other times suggesting walks along the creek where they could talk privately. Always, he was respectful of her boundaries, never pressing for more than Faith was ready to give. Slowly, cautiously, Faith allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness again. Grant's steady presence, his unwavering support, and the depth of feeling she saw in his eyes when he looked at her began to melt the ice that had formed around her heart after Thomas died. They spoke of their past, Grant's privileged upbringing in Connecticut, his decision to become a teacher rather than follow his late father into medicine, the broken engagement in Philadelphia that had prompted his move west. Faith shared her own story, her childhood on a small farm in Ohio, her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 20, her marriage to Thomas and their move to Deadwood seeking mining opportunities. "I love Thomas," Faith told Grant one Sunday as they sat by the creek. "He was a good man, kind and hardworking. When the doctor in Cheyenne told us I couldn't have children, Thomas held me all night while I cried. He said it didn't matter, that we had each other." Her voice broke slightly, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes, the dreams dying. Grant's hand found hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "Thomas loved you for who you are, not for what your body could or couldn't do." "I know," Faith whispered. "But after he died, I had nothing left to offer anyone. No children, no legacy, just emptiness." Grant turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "Faith Wilson, you have more to offer than most people I've ever known. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength in the face of cruelty and loss, these are worth more than any biological function." Faith looked down at their joined hands. "The town doesn't see it that way." "Then the town is blind," Grant said firmly. "But I see you, Faith. I see all of you, and I love what I see." It was the second time he had used the word love, and this time Faith allowed herself to truly hear it, to believe it. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted softly, the words both frightening and freeing. "And it terrifies me." Grant's smile was gentle. "Love should be a little terrifying. It means you're risking something precious." Faith met his eyes, finding courage in the warmth she saw there. "What happens when school ends next week? Will you stay in Deadwood for the summer?" "I intend to," Grant confirmed. "I've spoken to Mr. Henderson about carpentry work at the hotel. He needs repairs on several rooms and is willing to hire me for the summer months." He hesitated. "And you? Will you stay?" Faith nodded. "This is my home, for better or worse. I'll likely take in mending and help Mrs. Thornton with her new baby to make ends meet until school resumes." Grant seemed to be considering something. Finally, he asked, "Faith, would you consider becoming my wife before the fall term begins?" The directness of the question took Faith's breath away. "Grant, Not an immediate answer, he added quickly. But I want you to know my intentions are serious. I love you, Faith. I want to build a life with you, whether that includes children or not. Faith felt tears prick her eyes. You truly mean that, don't you? With all my heart, Grant assured her. Think about it. Pray about it. We have the summer ahead of us. Faith squeezed his hand. I will. The final day of school arrived, bringing with it the traditional exhibition where students demonstrated their learning for proud parents. Faith and Grant had worked tirelessly to ensure each child had something to showcase: recitations for the younger ones, complex mathematical problems solved by the older boys, essays and artwork displayed on the walls. Even Harold Peterson seemed impressed, particularly when his son Roger confidently presented a detailed analysis of the U.S. Constitution that Grant had helped him prepare. The boys never shown such interest in his studies before, Peterson remarked grudgingly to Grant. You've done good work with him. Roger has natural intelligence and leadership qualities, Grant replied. He just needed the right guidance to channel those traits positively. As the exhibition concluded and parents began collecting their children for the summer break, Faith found herself surrounded by mothers expressing gratitude for her teaching. William's reading has improved so much, Mrs. Collins said warmly. You have such patience with him. And my Sarah loves your poetry lessons, added Mrs. Baker. She recites them at home constantly. Faith accepted their thanks with surprise. These same women had often been cool toward her in town, participating in the whispers about her condition. Yet here they were, acknowledging her work with their children. She caught Grant watching her from across the room, a knowing smile on his face. He had seen what she was only beginning to understand, that her value to this community went far beyond her ability to bear children. Her contribution to their children's education mattered. As the last families departed and Faith began cleaning up the classroom for the summer, Grant approached her. A successful year, wouldn't you say? He asked, helping her stack primers on the shelf. Very, Faith agreed. Though I'll miss them over the summer. Grant glanced out the window to where the last children were disappearing down the road, then turned back to Faith with a serious expression. There's something I need to tell you. Faith's heart stuttered. What is it? I received a letter yesterday from the school board in Denver. They've offered me a position for the fall term. Higher salary, larger school, more opportunity for advancement. Faith felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Despite all Grant's assurances, despite his talk of love and marriage, the reality was as she had feared. He was leaving. Men like Grant Johnson didn't stay in places like Deadwood. I see, she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. Congratulations. It's a wonderful opportunity for you. Grant studied her face. I haven't accepted. Why not? Faith asked, confusion mixing with the hurt. It's clearly a better position than sharing a one-room schoolhouse in Deadwood. Because my life is here now, Grant said simply. With you if you'll have me. Faith stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would turn down Denver for Deadwood. For me, in a heartbeat, Grant confirmed. Faith, I meant what I said by the creek. I want to marry you to build a life here together. He took a step closer. Unless you'd prefer Denver, we could go together, start fresh where no one knows your past. Faith's mind spun with possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Leave Deadwood. The town held painful memories, certainly, but it was also the last place she had been with Thomas, the place she had built a life of her own. I don't know, she admitted. I hadn't considered leaving. Grant nodded. You don't have to decide now. The offer remains open until the end of June. He touched her cheek gently. But know this, wherever you are is where I want to be. Faith leaned into his touch, overcome by the depth of his commitment. "No one has ever put me first like this," she whispered. "Then it's about time someone did," Grant replied, his voice thick with emotion. In the empty schoolhouse, with the summer sun streaming through the windows, Faith made a decision. She lifted her face to Grant's and for the first time pressed her lips to his in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and hard-won hope. Grant responded tenderly, his arms encircling her with a gentleness that made Faith feel simultaneously protected and empowered. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless, eyes bright with emotion. "Is that a yes?" Grant asked, his voice husky. "It's a yes to marrying you," Faith clarified. "As for Denver or Deadwood, I need more time to consider." Grant's smile was radiant. "That's more than enough for now." As they finished closing the schoolhouse for summer, Faith felt lighter than she had in years. Whatever the future held, whether in Deadwood or Denver, she would face it with Grant beside her, a man who loved her completely, empty arms and all. Word of Faith and Grant's engagement spread through Deadwood like wildfire. Reactions ranged from genuine congratulations to barely concealed disapproval. The Jennings family was notably cool, Violet making a point of ignoring Faith entirely when they crossed paths in town. Harold Peterson made his opinion known more directly, cornering Grant outside the mercantile. "Thought you had more sense than to tie yourself to a barren woman," he muttered. "Plenty of healthy young girls in town who could give you proper sons." Grant's response was measured but firm. "I'm marrying the woman I love, Mr. Peterson. My family planning is none of your concern." Not all reactions were negative. Mrs. Thornton was delighted, inviting them both to dinner to celebrate. Dr. Miller offered gruff congratulations, telling Grant he was getting a woman of rare quality. Even Roger Peterson, defying his father's obvious disapproval, stopped by Faith's house with a clumsily picked bunch of wildflowers. "I'm glad you're marrying Mr. Johnson," the boy said awkwardly. "He's less grumpy when you're around." Faith accepted the flowers with a smile. "Thank you, Roger. That might be the nicest compliment I've received." As June progressed, Faith and Grant settled into a routine. Grant worked at the hotel during the days while Faith helped at Mrs. Thornton's and took in sewing. Evenings and Sundays they spent together, sometimes at Faith's house with the door properly open, other times walking by the creek or picnicking in the meadow outside town. They discussed their future openly, whether to stay in Deadwood or accept the Denver position, whether to live in Faith's small house or find something larger, whether to consider adoption immediately or wait until they were more established. "I've written to my sister in Boston," Faith told Grant one evening as they sat on her porch. "She works with an orphanage there. She says there are always children needing homes, especially older ones that most families don't want." Grant squeezed her hand. "We could give a child like that a good home." "We could," Faith agreed, the idea filling her with a cautious hope. "Though we should be settled first, wherever we decide to live." The Denver question remained unresolved as June drew to a close. Grant had written requesting an extension on his decision, but had received no reply. They agreed to proceed with their wedding plans regardless, setting a date in mid-July. Reverend Simmons would perform the ceremony at the small church, with a modest reception to follow at the hotel restaurant where they had shared their first dinner. Faith asked Mrs. Thornton to stand with her, while Grant invited Dr. Miller, having formed a friendship with the gruff physician over the weeks since his arrival. Faith was at the dressmaker's being fitted for her wedding gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk, when Mrs. Jennings entered the shop, Violet trailing behind her. "Mrs. Wilson," Mrs. Jennings greeted her with obvious surprise. "How lovely to see you." "Mrs. Jennings, Miss Jennings," Faith returned politely. "I hope you're both well." "Quite well, thank you, Mrs." Jennings eyed the half-finished wedding dress on the dressmaker's form. "Preparing for your ceremony, I see." The slight hesitation was deliberate, Faith knew. In Mrs. Jennings's eyes, a wedding between a barren widow and an educated newcomer was hardly worth celebrating. "Yes, we're looking forward to it," Faith said, refusing to be baited. "Will you and your family be attending?" Mrs. Jennings looked momentarily taken aback. "Well, of course, if we're invited." "All of Deadwood is welcome," Faith replied. "It will be a simple ceremony, but we'd be pleased to have you there." Violet, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. "Is it true Mr. Johnson turned down a position in Denver to stay here with you?" The directness of the question startled Faith. "Grant is considering several options for our future," she answered carefully. "It seems a waste," Violet said, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. "A man of his education and prospects tied to Deadwood because of sentiment." "Violet, Mrs." Jennings hissed, embarrassed by her daughter's bluntness. Faith met Violet's gaze steadily. "Love isn't sentiment, Miss Jennings. It's choice choosing someone else's happiness alongside your own day after day." She gathered her things. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish my errands." As Faith left the shop, she heard Mrs. Jennings scolding her daughter. But Violet's words had struck a nerve. Was she holding Grant back from the future he deserved? The question nagged at her as she completed her shopping and headed home. Faith was so distracted that she nearly collided with a woman on the boardwalk, a stranger, nicely dressed but travel-worn, with a small trunk at her feet. "I'm so sorry," Faith apologized. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "Quite all right," the woman replied. "Perhaps you can help me." "I'm looking for the schoolteacher, Mr. Johnson." Faith's heart stuttered. "May I ask why you're seeking him?" The woman smiled, extending her hand. "Forgive my manners. I'm Alina Blackwood from the Denver School Board. I've come to discuss Mr. Johnson's position with him personally." She glanced around. "He's proven difficult to pin down via correspondence." Faith felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. "I see. Mr. Johnson is currently working at the hotel, the large building at the end of the street." "Wonderful, thank you." Miss Blackwood studied Faith curiously. "And you are?" "Faith Wilson. I'm the other teacher at the school." Faith hesitated, then added, "and Grant's fiancée." Alina Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, how interesting. Mr. Johnson made no mention of a fiancée in his correspondence with us." "Our engagement is recent," Faith explained, uncomfortable with the woman's scrutiny. "I see." Miss Blackwood's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I look forward to meeting with Mr. Johnson. The Denver position is quite prestigious, exactly the kind of opportunity a talented educator like him should seize." Faith nodded, unable to form a response around the lump in her throat. She excused herself and hurried home, her mind racing with new doubts. Grant had been corresponding with the Denver School Board all this time. He had told her about the offer, but not about ongoing negotiations. What else wasn't he telling her? Faith spent the afternoon in turmoil, alternating between rational explanations and deepening insecurity. By the time Grant knocked on her door that evening, she had worked herself into a state of quiet distress. "Faith." Grant's smile faded as he took in her expression. "What's wrong?" Faith gestured for him to sit. "I met someone interesting in town today." Alina Blackwood from the Denver School Board. Grant's face registered surprise, then discomfort. "Ah, I didn't know she was coming to Deadwood." "Apparently you've been corresponding with her," Faith said, trying to keep accusation from her voice. She seemed to think the Denver position was still very much on the table. Grant sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It is, technically. I never formally declined it." "Why not?" Faith asked quietly. You told me weeks ago that you were choosing to stay in Deadwood, with me. And I meant it, Grant insisted. But I thought it prudent to keep our options open. Denver would offer more opportunities, better pay, a chance for both of us to start fresh. Both of us, Faith repeated. You've been discussing me with the Denver school board. Grant looked uncomfortable. I mentioned that my fiancé is also a teacher, and that any position for me would ideally include consideration for you as well. Faith stood, needing to move to process this information. You've been planning our future in Denver without discussing it with me. No, Faith, Grant protested. I've been exploring possibilities, that's all. The final decision was always going to be ours together. Then why didn't you tell me about your continued correspondence with them? Faith challenged. Why keep it secret? Grant looked genuinely confused. It wasn't a secret. I just didn't want to pressure you while you were coming to terms with our engagement and the idea of leaving Deadwood. Faith wanted to believe him, but Violet's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Grant, be honest with me. Are you settling for Deadwood because of me? Because you feel obligated now that we're engaged, settling. Grant stood as well, his expression pained. Faith, loving you isn't settling. It's the best choice I've ever made. But Denver is a better opportunity for you, Faith persisted. Everyone says so, even you admit it. Professionally, perhaps, Grant conceded. But life is more than work. I want a life with you, wherever that might be. Faith turned away, fighting tears. I met Violet Jennings at the dressmaker's today. She said it was a waste for a man with your prospects to tie himself to Deadwood because of sentiment. Grant moved behind her, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. Violet Jennings doesn't know the first thing about what matters to me. She knows that Denver would offer you more than I can, Faith whispered. Grant turned her to face him. Faith Wilson, look at me. He waited until she raised her eyes to his. I don't want Denver without you. I don't want any future that doesn't include you. If you prefer to stay in Deadwood, then we stay. If you want to try Denver, we'll go. If you want to move to Boston to be closer to your sister, or to California, or to the moon, I'll follow you. The absolute certainty in his voice broke through Faith's doubts. I'm sorry, she said softly. I let my insecurities get the better of me. Never apologize for being honest about your feelings, Grant said, drawing her into his arms. That's how we build trust. I should have been clearer about my correspondence with Denver. Faith rested her head against his chest, taking comfort in the steady beat of his heart. I do trust you. It's myself I doubt sometimes whether I'm enough for you. You're more than enough, Grant murmured into her hair. You're everything. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the fading evening light. Finally, Faith spoke. We should meet with Miss Blackwood together, hear what Denver is offering, then make our decision. Grant pulled back slightly to look at her. You'd consider Denver? Faith nodded. I've been thinking about it more since we discussed adoption. A larger city might offer more opportunities for us to find a child who needs a home. She touched his face gently. And you deserve a position that challenges you, that recognizes your talents. So do you, Grant pointed out. You're an excellent teacher, Faith. Then perhaps Denver might have a place for both of us, Faith suggested. It's worth exploring at least. Grant kissed her forehead. Together. Together, Faith agreed, the word a promise. The next day, Faith and Grant met with Alina Blackwood at the hotel restaurant. The Denver representative was clearly surprised to find Faith included in the meeting, but recovered quickly. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Johnson mentioned you're also an educator, she said politely. How long have you taught in Deadwood? 5 years, Faith replied. 3 as the sole teacher, and this past term sharing duties with Grant. Miss Blackwood nodded. And your educational background? 2 years at the Women's Seminary in Cincinnati, Faith said. feeling suddenly inadequate next to Grant's university education and practical experience since then. I see. Miss Blackwood turned her attention to Grant. Mr. Johnson, Denver is prepared to offer you the position of head teacher at our new school on Lawrence Street. The salary is twice what you're earning here, with a proper residence provided adjacent to the school building. Grant glanced at Faith before responding. And what of Mrs. Wilson? Would there be a teaching position for my wife as well? Miss Blackwood hesitated. We hadn't specifically discussed that possibility. Our primary interest is in securing your services, Mr. Johnson. I understand, Grant said evenly. But as I mentioned in my letters, my fiancée and I come as a pair. Her teaching experience is valuable and would be an asset to your school. Faith touched his arm lightly. Grant, don't jeopardize this opportunity on my account. I can find other work in Denver. No, Grant said firmly. We're educators together or not at all. Miss Blackwood studied them both, her expression calculating. There might be a possibility, she said slowly. We're expanding rapidly and qualified teachers are always in demand, perhaps an assistant position for the younger grades. With room for advancement based on performance, Grant added. Miss Blackwood smiled slightly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Johnson, but yes, I believe that could be arranged. They spent the next hour discussing details, salary, accommodations, curriculum expectations, and start dates. By the end of the meeting, a tentative agreement was in place. Grant and Faith would move to Denver after their wedding, beginning their positions when the fall term started in September. As Miss Blackwood gathered her papers, she looked between them with new respect. I admit, I was prepared to be more persuasive about luring you to Denver, Mr. Johnson. I see now why you were hesitant to commit without consulting your fiancée first. Grant smiled, taking Faith's hand. Best decision I ever made, after Miss Blackwood departed. Faith and Grant walked slowly through town, both processing the magnitude of the changes ahead. Are you certain about this? Faith asked. Denver is a big step. I'm certain about us, Grant replied. Denver is just a place. We'll make it home together. Faith squeezed his hand. And after we're settled, we can write to my sister about adoption possibilities. I'd like that, Grant said, his expression softening. Though I want you to know that if it's just the two of us forever, that's more than enough for me. Faith stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I love you, Grant Johnson. I never thought I'd say those words to anyone again, but I do. I love you with my whole heart. Grant's eyes brightened with emotion. And I love you, Faith Wilson, soon to be Faith Johnson. In the middle of Deadwood's Main Street, in full view of the town that had judged her for so long, Faith stood on tiptoe and kissed her fiancé, no longer caring who might see or what they might say. She was loved for exactly who she was. Everything else was just noise. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Faith finished packing up the belongings she would take to Denver, selling or giving away items she no longer needed. The small house that had been her sanctuary and prison these past years would be rented to a new family arriving in August. Grant secured a wagon and team for their journey to Denver, planning a leisurely trip that would allow them to enjoy the scenery and each other's company. They would spend their wedding night at the hotel in Deadwood, then depart the following morning. The night before the wedding, Faith found herself unable to sleep. She sat on her porch in the moonlight, remembering the day Grant had first arrived in Deadwood, the day she had planned to end her life. How different everything was now. Just a few months later, a soft knock at her door startled her from her reverie. Faith opened it to find Mrs. Thornton standing there, baby Faith sleeping peacefully in her arms. I'm sorry to disturb you so late, Mrs. Thornton whispered. But I wanted to see you privately before tomorrow's festivities. Faith welcomed her inside, lighting a lamp in the sitting room. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's wonderful," Mrs. Thornton assured her. I wanted to thank you again for saving us both, and to tell you how happy I am that you found love again." Faith smiled, touched by the sentiment. "Thank you, I never thought I would." "God has a way of surprising us," Mrs. Thornton said, adjusting the sleeping baby. "Which brings me to why I'm really here." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask if you would be little Faith's godmother." Faith stared at her, completely caught off guard. "Me? But surely there are others more suitable family members, or—" "There's no one more suitable than the woman who helped bring her into this world," Mrs. Thornton interrupted gently. "Even though you're moving to Denver, you'll always be connected to her, to us. We want her to know the brave, kind woman she was named for." Tears filled Faith's eyes as she looked at the sleeping infant. "I would be honored," she whispered. "Good," Mrs. Thornton said, satisfied. "Now, would you like to hold your goddaughter before I take her home?" Faith nodded, carefully accepting the warm bundle. As she cradled the baby, feeling the soft weight and smelling the sweet scent of her, Faith felt a curious peace settle over her. This child was not hers by birth, but there was a connection between them nonetheless, a bond formed in those frightening, miraculous moments of her birth. Perhaps this was a glimpse of what the future might hold, Faith thought. Not a child of her body, but a child of her heart. The possibility filled her with hope. "Thank you for this gift," Faith told Mrs. Thornton as she reluctantly returned the baby. "It means more than you know." After they left, Faith returned to bed and finally slept, dreaming of children's laughter and Grant's smile. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union. Faith dressed with Mrs. Thornton's help, the ivory silk gown complemented by a simple veil and a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning. "You look radiant, Mrs. Thornton told her as Faith studied her reflection. "Grant Johnson is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Faith replied, thinking of how close she had come to missing this day entirely. The church was surprisingly full when Faith arrived. Not only were Grant's friends present, Dr. Miller, Mr. Henderson from the hotel, several of the older students including Roger Peterson, but many townspeople Faith had assumed disapproved of her, had come as well. Mrs. Jennings sat with her husband, though Violet was notably absent. Harold Peterson looked uncomfortable but had brought his wife, who smiled warmly at Faith. Even the dressmaker who had witnessed Violet's cutting remarks had closed her shop to attend. As the simple ceremony began and Faith walked toward Grant waiting at the altar, she realized something profound. Deadwood had not been entirely against her. There had been kindness here too, often quiet and unnoticed amid the louder voices of judgment. Grant's face as she approached was a study in joy and wonder. He looked at her as if she were the most precious sight he had ever beheld, and Faith felt beautiful in a way that transcended mere appearance. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Simmons began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over Faith as she stood beside Grant, their hands joined. When the time came for their vows, Grant spoke with a conviction that left no doubt of his commitment. "I, Grant Johnson, take you, Faith Wilson, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it was Faith's turn, her voice was soft but steady. "I, Faith Wilson, take you, Grant Johnson, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." They exchanged simple gold bands, Grant's fingers warm and sure as he slipped the ring onto Faith's finger. By the power vested in me, Reverend Simmons concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Grant lifted Faith's veil and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Faith felt a lightness she had not experienced in years. The reception at the hotel was a modest but joyful affair. Mr. Henderson had outdone himself with the food, and someone had arranged for a fiddler to play for dancing. Faith and Grant moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes for their new life in Denver. To Faith's surprise, Roger Peterson approached them during a quiet moment. The boy seemed nervous but determined. Mrs. Johnson, he began, the new name sounding strange but wonderful to Faith's ears. I wanted to apologize again for the things I said about you. My pa, he doesn't always understand things right. Faith smiled gently. Thank you, Roger. That's very mature of you. The boy turned to Grant. Will you be teaching in Denver now, Mr. Johnson? Grant nodded. Yes, at a new school there. Mrs. Johnson will be teaching as well. Roger looked thoughtful. I told my pa I want to go to university someday, like you did. He glanced at Faith. He said it was a foolish idea, but I don't think it is. It's an excellent idea, Grant assured him. You're a bright young man with good potential. Would you? Roger hesitated. Would you write to me sometimes? Tell me about the school in Denver and what books I should be reading to prepare for university. Grant exchanged a glance with Faith, both touched by the request. I'd be honored to correspond with you, Roger, and perhaps you could visit us in Denver someday. The boy's face lit up. Really? You'd let me visit, of course, Faith said. Our home will always be open to dedicated students. After Roger left, Grant pulled Faith onto the dance floor for a waltz. As they moved together to the music, he murmured, You're going to be an exceptional mother someday, Faith Johnson. Faith looked up at him, her heart full. We're going to be exceptional parents together, she corrected. Whenever and however that happens. As the celebration continued around them, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair to the height of joy, from empty arms to a heart overflowing with love and possibility. Later that night, in their hotel room, Grant held Faith close as husband and wife for the first time. In the intimate darkness, he whispered against her hair, Do you remember the day we met? When the wagon overturned and Jimmy was trapped? Of course, Faith murmured, content in his arms. That was the moment I first saw who you truly were, Grant confessed. So fearless, so focused on helping that child. And later when I learned how the town had treated you, how they mocked your empty arms. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted to tell you then what I'll tell you every day for the rest of our lives. What's that? Faith asked, lifting her face to his. Grant cupped her cheek tenderly. That I'll hold you until your arms are full again, full of our life together, our love, our family, however it forms. He kissed her softly. Your arms were never truly empty, Faith. They were waiting to embrace our future. In that moment, Faith knew with absolute certainty that whatever lay ahead in Denver, whatever challenges or joys awaited them, she would face them with Grant beside her, the man who had seen value in her when she could not see it herself, the man who had chosen her completely and without reservation. Faith Wilson Johnson fell asleep in her husband's embrace, no longer feeling empty but wonderfully, blessedly full of hope. 5 years later, the Johnson household in Denver was a place of warmth and laughter. Faith and Grant had established themselves as respected educators at the expanding Lawrence Street School, with Faith now heading the primary department while Grant served as headmaster. Their home, a comfortable 2-story house near the school, was alive with activity on this particular autumn afternoon, as Faith prepared for the arrival of special guests. "Mama, Samuel is pulling my hair again," came a plaintive cry from the sitting room. Faith smiled as she finished arranging flowers on the dining table. "Samuel, be gentle with your sister," she called. "Emma, come help me set the table, please." A dark-haired girl of 8 appeared in the doorway, her expression brightening at the task. Emma had been their first adopted child, coming to them just 6 months after they settled in Denver. Shy and withdrawn initially after losing her parents to influenza, she had blossomed under Faith and Grant's patient care. Samuel, a rambunctious 5-year-old they had welcomed 2 years later, had a different story. Abandoned at a Denver orphanage with no known family, he had captured their hearts immediately with his mischievous smile and resilient spirit. "Is Aunt Margaret coming too?" Emma asked as she carefully placed forks beside the plates. "Yes, and Uncle David and your cousins," Faith confirmed. "And Mrs. Thornton and little Faith from Deadwood." Emma nodded seriously. "And Roger is staying with us while he attends university." "That's right," Faith said, impressed by her daughter's memory. "It's going to be quite a full house." The front door opened and Grant's voice called out, "We're home!" Samuel darted from the sitting room, racing to greet his father. Faith and Emma followed more sedately, arriving in the entryway to find Grant lifting Samuel high while a tall young man watched with amusement. "Roger!" Emma exclaimed, hurrying forward to greet the visitor. Roger Peterson had indeed grown tall in the 5 years since Faith and Grant had left Deadwood. Now 19 and preparing to begin studies at the newly established University of Denver, he looked more man than boy, though his smile still held a hint of the child they had taught. "Mrs. Johnson," he greeted Faith warmly. "The house looks wonderful." Faith embraced him. "It's good to see you, Roger. Was your journey comfortable as a stagecoach can be?" Roger replied with a grin. Though the scenery was worth the discomfort. Grant set Samuel down. "Roger's brought letters from Deadwood, quite a few of them. News travels fast," Roger explained. "Once people heard I was coming to stay with you, everyone wanted to send greetings." They moved to the sitting room, where Roger distributed letters from various Deadwood residents, including, surprisingly, one from Harold Peterson. "Pa's changed some," Roger said, noting Faith's expression. "After you left, the new teacher couldn't handle us boys at all. Made Pa realize what he'd lost when you two moved to Denver," Grant laughed. "Better late than never, I suppose. He's proud I'm attending university," Roger added, though he still grumbles about the cost. As they caught up on Deadwood news, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Faith's sister Margaret and her family from Boston. They had moved to Denver 2 years earlier at Faith's encouragement, Margaret taking a position at the orphanage where Samuel had been adopted. The house gradually filled with guests, Margaret and David with their 3 children. Then Mrs. Thornton and her daughter Faith, now a precocious 5-year-old, who immediately took charge of showing Samuel her new doll. Faith moved among them all, her heart full as she watched the blended family they had created, some by birth, some by choice, all connected by love and shared history. Grant found her in a quiet moment in the kitchen, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Happy?" he murmured against her ear. Faith leaned back against him. "Completely, though I'm beginning to think we need a larger house." Grant chuckled. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Faith turned in his arms. "Margaret mentioned a brother and sister at the orphanage, 3 and 6. Their mother died in childbirth and their father couldn't care for them alone." Grant studied her face. "You've already fallen in love with them, haven't you?" "I met them yesterday," Faith admitted. "The little girl, Hannah, has your eyes. And the boy, William, is so serious, so determined to protect his sister." She trailed off, then asked softly, "Would it be too much? 4 children, Grant's answer was a tender kiss. Nothing is too much when we face it together, he assured her. Besides, Emma has been asking for more siblings. Faith laughed. She has your teaching instincts, always wanting to help the younger ones. And your compassion, Grant added. Your arms that once seemed empty to you have held so many children now our own, your students, your goddaughter. Faith glanced toward the sitting room, where Emma was reading to the younger children while Roger and the adults conversed by the fireplace. I never imagined this life, she said quietly. That day you arrived in Deadwood, I had given up hope entirely. I know, Grant said, his expression solemn. Mrs. Thornton told me years later that she had worried about you, that something in your eyes that morning frightened her. Faith nodded, not surprised that others had sensed her desperation. You saved me, she said simply. No, Grant corrected gently. You saved yourself by being brave enough to try again, to teach another day, to help with that overturned wagon, to believe you deserved happiness. He touched her cheek. I just had the good fortune to be there when you rediscovered your strength. A crash from the sitting room, followed by Samuel's distinctive wail, interrupted their moment. Duty calls, Faith said with a smile. As they returned to their guests, Faith paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Children playing, adults laughing, the home she and Grant had built together, full of life and love. Once, she had been mocked for empty arms, her value as a woman questioned because she couldn't bear children. Now her arms were never empty, filled with students each day at school, with Emma and Samuel and soon perhaps Hannah and William at home, with the countless lives she and Grant touched through their work and love. That terrible April morning in 1878, when she had planned to end her life, seemed like another lifetime now, a dark chapter that had unexpectedly led to her greatest happiness. As Grant moved to comfort Samuel, while Roger distracted the other children with a story, Faith offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had promised to hold her until her arms were full again, and had kept that promise beyond her wildest dreams.